Hey folks, what's going on? This is Jeff Hennig, and I wanted to do a special YouTube post for Good Friday. Not walking and talking today, just kind of staying in one place. Want to talk about Good Friday and what that represents. Wasn't all that good, really. That's when Jesus was crucified. And I wanted to go into a little bit of detail with that. See, some people think that crucifixion is like they see in the movies, with folks just hanging around waiting to die. And it ain't like that. By his scourging, we're healed. He was beaten almost to death. Amazing amounts of lost blood and flesh ripped off of his body. And then he was pierced for our transgressions. When he was done carrying that cross to Golgotha, they laid it on the ground. And then one arm was nailed to the post, but there was a hole in the crossbeam, and they slipped that nail into that hole, but it wasn't slipping through his arm. They pounded it through his wrist, and the spot on his wrist where they would have pounded the nail through, there is a nerve cluster right there, and if you tap that spot, there's shock waves that go all the way up through your arm. So you can imagine with a nail going through that spot. Everything about the crucifixion was designed and innovated by the Romans to produce more pain, more agony. So once that arm is nailed down, then they take the other arm and they go to nail that in. Well, we're not all made alike, right? All the Roman crosses were. So if you didn't fit, they'd make it fit. So they would stretch that arm, they'd yank on it, they'd pull on it. And a lot of times it'd be dislocated, or maybe even that joint would be broken. So once that was nailed into place, then they'd nail the ankles in. And that spike would go in the front and come out the heel, right into the post. After they bent the legs at an angle, so the victim could move a little bit, they oftentimes would put a plank at seat height, where that person might be able to perch for a little bit. And this was not for comfort. This was to prolong the agony. See, if you could get a little bit of purchase on that plank, maybe you could breathe a little bit longer. Well, the longer you could breathe, the longer you'd feel pain. So once he was nailed onto that cross, they would lift that cross up, and they would drop it a couple of feet into the ground, a hole that was already there, maybe a couple of feet deep. And that couple of feet of drop was long enough to cause shock when you hit the bottom. So once again, a little bit more pain. In the movies, you see tall crosses with victims up in the air a ways, and that's not really accurate. In reality, they're only maybe a couple feet off the ground. And the reason for this, the Romans didn't want the bodies out of reach. They wanted to be able to manipulate the bodies at will to create more pain, to create more agony, to extract more torture from those victims. This meant that anyone could walk up to within inches of their face, within inches of the face of the victim. They could just walk up. Hey, what do you think you're doing up there, huh? Hawk a spit at them or whatever. And they did, with spits, with insults, talking all kind of trash, just like we read about in the scripture. He was oppressed and he was afflicted. When you're hanging with your arms outstretched like that, your lungs are elongated, so you can't exhale. If you can't exhale, that means you can't inhale either, because your lungs are full. So what do? Well, you have to push up to be able to catch a breath. You're not going to be able to stand up there long, because you got a spike going into your ankles. So you can only be up there for a short period of time. So you let go. And now you can't breathe again. When we see the movies, when these guys are just hanging there, they actually would be moving back and forth continuously, trying to get a breath, and then the pain was too much, and then they hang back down. And it would go on like this and go and go and go, and they knew when it was getting towards the end, because the victim was starting to panic, because the lungs are starting to fill with fluids. And if you ever seen a drowning victim, that's what they're doing. They're panicking because they can't get enough air. And this is what was happening. This can continue for days. It oftentimes did, up to 3 days. So when Jesus was pulled down from the cross, Governor Pontius Pilate was surprised that it was only a few hours. He was cut off out of the land of the living for the transgression of my people, to whom the stroke was due. They wanted him down before sundown, because that's when the Sabbath would start, and they didn't want the Sabbath to be defiled. So the Romans, typically, if they were done torturing and they just wanted it over with, they'd break the legs of the victim so they couldn't push up anymore and couldn't get any more air. Well, that's what they did. They broke the legs of the other two criminals on the cross. Well, when they got to Jesus, he was already dead. So to make sure, they stabbed him in the side with a spear, and according to scriptures, we saw water and blood. There was the fluid coming out along with the blood, which told them that that victim was dead. So they brought Jesus' body down, and one of the Jews named Joseph of Arimathea asked to take custody of the body, and he exposed himself to some great risks in doing this. First, Jesus is an enemy of Rome, so one doesn't just take custody of a revolt leader's body without some scrutiny. They might allow it, but they'll be keeping an eye on you, for sure. Second, Joseph was a member of the Sanhedrin. This is a highly politicized legislative body, and any weakness found in one's conduct would be reason enough to cause one's dismissal from the group. So he was running that risk. Number 3 was financial. That tomb in which Joseph buried Jesus, they said it was worth a year's wages. So if we put that in today's terms, a year's salary for the average person, $30,000 to $40,000 in the United States. Okay, so he's risking $30,000 to $40,000 in today's terms in the United States. And one thing about Jewish tradition is that a tomb like that can be used for multiple bodies, but they have to be members of the immediate family. Joseph is not an immediate family member of Jesus. So according to Jewish tradition, that grave was defiled forevermore. So Joseph knew he was tossing away $30,000 to $40,000 in our terms worth of money. That's not an inexpensive amount. That is not insignificant. So Jesus went to the grave on Good Friday. Well, we don't know if it was Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, because there's different reckonings of time. The Bible doesn't say specifically what day of the week. All that we know is that it was important for us to know that he died on that day as our sacrificial lamb. But there's more to the story. We'll talk about that later. Be blessed, folks. Love you.